Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. This morning we'll be reading verses 8 and 9 from Uddhava Gita, Canto 11, Chapter 11. We heard yesterday about Uddhava Suparna, two birds in the tree, and how they're similar and different, and who's who. One who is enlightened in self-realization, although living within the material body, sees himself as transcendental to the body, just as one who has arisen from a dream gives up identification with the dream body. A foolish person, however, although not identical with his material body, but transcendental to it, thinks himself to be situated in the body, just as one who is dreaming sees himself situated in an imaginary body. Bhaktisiddhanta's translation, same verse. A liberated soul, although living within the body, sees himself as distinct from the body, just as one who wakes up from a dream sees that it was not his real life. An ignorant person, however, thinks the body to be the self, just as a dreaming person takes what he sees to be his reality. And the BBT purport. In Lord Krishna's discussion on the different characteristics of liberated and conditioned souls, the Lord first clarified the distinction between the eternally liberated personality of Godhead and the marginal potency, the innumerable jivas, who are sometimes conditioned and sometimes liberated. In this and the next 9 verses, the Lord describes the different symptoms of liberated and conditioned souls. In a dream, one sees oneself in an imaginary body, but upon waking, one gives up all identification with that body. Similarly, one who has awakened to Krishna consciousness no longer identifies with the gross or subtle material bodies, nor does he become affected by the happiness and distress of material life. On the other hand, a foolish person, or kumati, does not awaken from the dream of material existence and is afflicted with innumerable problems due to false identification with gross and subtle material bodies. One should become situated in one's eternal spiritual identity, Nitya Svarup, by properly identifying oneself as the eternal servant of Krishna. One becomes relieved of his false material identity, and therefore the miseries of illusory existence immediately cease, just as the anxiety of a troublesome dream ceases as soon as one awakens to his normal, pleasant surroundings. It should be understood, however, that the analogy of awakening from a dream can never be applied to the Supreme Personality of Godhead, who is never in illusion, the Lord is eternally awake and enlightened in his own unique category called Vishnu Tattva. Such knowledge is easily understood by one who is vidvan, or enlightened in Krishna consciousness. That was the BBT purport. Here's Bhaktisiddhanta's purport, much shorter. Although the subject matter of a dream may remain fresh in the mind of a person when he wakes up, the illusory nature of the dream is immediately realized by him. However, Those who are sleeping in the lap of material nature cannot realize the illusory nature of their existence until they awaken by means of self-realization. The seer himself is eternal, but his dreams at night and his experiences during the day are of no lasting importance, being no better than a phantasmagoria. Vishaka, what's phantasmagoria mean? You've heard that word before? No? Phantasmagoria means a flower in the sky. Is there any such thing as a flower in the sky? No. That's what phantasmagoria is. Just imagined to exist, but it doesn't exist. Another that's used in Sanskrit is horse eggs. There's such a thing as horse eggs. There's eggs and there's horses. Horse eggs? Phantasmagoria. Doesn't exist. No more meaning than phantasmagoria. Bhaktisiddhanta's gloss of Vishwanath's commentary. In the next 9 verses, the Lord will explain the difference between the conditioned souls and the liberated souls. In a dream, one sees oneself in an imaginary body, but upon waking, one gives up all identification with that body. Similarly, one who has awakened to Krishna consciousness will no longer identify with the gross and subtle material bodies. Nor does he become affected by the happiness and distress of material life. On the other hand, a foolish person does not awaken from the dream of material existence and is afflicted with innumerable problems due to false identification with the gross and subtle material bodies. One should become situated in one's eternal spiritual identity. Paragraph. By properly identifying oneself as the eternal servant of Krishna, one becomes relieved of his false material identity, and therefore the miseries of illusory existence immediately cease, just as the anxiety of a troublesome dream ceases as soon as one awakens to his normal, pleasant surroundings. And Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur's commentary, and that's it for text 8. The difference between the bound and liberated jivas. Remember here's a reminder. At the end of chapter 10, Uddhava asked a question about Nitya Mukta and Nitya Bandha jivas, eternally bound, eternally conditioned. And one living entity is described sometimes as sometimes and sometimes. So it's a contradiction, apparently. How to resolve it. So that's what's here. How does the liberated person exist in the body? The difference between the bound and liberated jivas is now being explained in 10 verses, this plus 9. How does a liberated person exist in the body? The liberated person is not situated in the body under the control of previous impressions arising from a dream. Though situated in the dream by remembrance, the person is not situated there. This is similar to the supposed condition of bhaditanu vritti. What's that? In that condition, he is not moved by the happiness and distress in the dream, since he is fixed in waking consciousness. Therefore, he is not actually situated in the body. The bound jiva, however, is situated in his body and experiences happiness and distress. This is like an ignorant person who, seeing a dream, participates in the dream. with his dream body. So let's go over that again, because I'm anticipating there's going to be some questions about it. So let's go over it again. It's nice purport. So the starting point is these texts are going to describe the distinction between liberated and in bondage or conditioned, liberated and conditioned jivas. So one distinction is, using a metaphor, experiencing happiness and distress in a dream, that when the dream is over, poof, the happiness and distress of the dream is over. And one is now relating to the surroundings when their eyes are open and awake. So that consciousness and that experience and that whole situation, reality, is not reality. And the bubble is popped and now there's another reality, but that other reality is also temporary. In so many ways temporary. When you go to sleep, that's gone again. So that the touchy part, how does a liberated person exist in the body? Question mark. 3 verses answer that question. The liberated person, Vidvan, is not situated in the body under the control of previous impressions. They're within, but not situated within. That is to say, they're identifying with their eternal reality. They can see the movie, but they're not identifying with the movie. The circumstance that's around them, either in the dream or in the waking state. The liberated, the Vidvan person, is not identifying with and thus not situated within. They realize it has nothing to do with them. They deal with the temporary. When it's cold, you wear a jacket, and when it's raining, you carry an umbrella and so forth. But it's not one. It isn't identifying. The liberated soul is not identifying with it. The sentence again. The liberated person, Vidvan, is not situated in the body under the control of previous impressions. Under the control of previous impressions means in the mind. This is the question you're asking about, or someone was asking about. The mind is the sixth sense. Was it you that asked? Somebody.
No, Shane, that's me.
Okay, somebody asked. Yeah. So the mind receives data or information from the senses, and an impression is made in the mind. So that's previous impressions. And those impressions within the mind are stored, like a photo file, sometimes described. Very subtle, better than Bill Gates, storage of data. It's stored in the mind. So the computer is just a replica of what the mind does, the binary processor that stores data. And the mind is more subtle. So there's previous impressions stored in the mind, and based upon the previous impressions stored in the mind, there's guna and karma packed up in all of that. Good and bad. The good and bad has to do with our choices, not just the impressions. So, but the choices are also influenced, not determined by, but influenced by the modes of nature, what mode of nature we have associated with. So the combination of guna and karma produces a body, gross, and of course subtle. Gross bodies are produced from the mind. From the gross come from the subtle. Now, the ingredients come from material nature, and the whole thing is overseen by higher authorities. But that's, there's a cause and there's an effect. There's remote cause and remote effect, and there's an ultimate cause and an ultimate effect. There's different layers of picturing reality of our experience. But so the Vidvan, or the liberated soul, is within the body, yes, but not identifying with it. And thus one can say he's not situated in the body. Kind of like, you're riding in your car. And you're in the car, but the soul is not, quote, in the car. The soul is transcendentally situated. If the car crashes, the soul isn't crashed. So one can say we are situated. One can also say not situated. In the body, under the control of previous impressions. Arising from a dream, though situated in the dream, by remembrance, the person is not situated there, the Vidvan person, the liberated person. They have awake experiences, they have dream experiences. They're not identifying with either of them, thus not situated within them, because they're situated in knowledge of who they are, while being aware of what's going on around them. This is similar to the supposed condition of bhaditanu vritti. In that condition, he is not moved by the happiness and distress in the dream, since he is fixed in waking consciousness. Therefore, he is not actually situated in the body. The bound jiva, however, is situated in his body and experiences happiness and distress. This is like an ignorant person who, seeing a dream, participates in the dream with his dream body. So it's going to be very beneficial to get a picture from Krishna what a liberated life is like. Like, what does it look like? What does it feel like? Because we're not there, but he's giving this picture. Now, the leverage from going back to the earlier parts of this chapter, it's a Maya Shakti influence of bondage and liberation. By Jnana Shakti or Vidya Shakti, one can become situated like this. And when one is situated like this, the body is there and doing things, you're perceiving things through the senses in the wake or the dreaming state, and it's going on, and the liberated Vidvan, or the one who has Vidya Shakti, doesn't identify with it. Although experiencing things, they don't identify with it. Text 9. An enlightened, there's some pictures. Let's do some pictures. This is a very clever illustration. That's the sleeping person and the awake person. One who is enlightened in self-realization. Which of the two is that? Although living within the material body, sees himself as transcendental to the body, just as one who has arisen from a dream gives up identification with the dream body. A foolish person, however, although not identical with his material body, but transcendental to it, thinks himself to be situated in the body, just as one who is dreaming sees himself as situated in an imaginary body. Okay. Now text 9. And there's some great graphics for text 9. You're going to like it. An enlightened person who is free from the contamination of material desire does not consider himself to be the performer of bodily activities. Rather, he knows that in all such activities, it is only the senses born of the modes of nature that are contacting sense objects, born of the same modes of nature. Here's the graphic. Check it out. Whoa. Senses and objects. Lots of synapses. Bhaktisiddhanta's translation. A learned person who has seen the futility of material desires does not think that he performs the activities of the body. Indeed, he knows that the activities of the body, which amount to the senses contacting their objects, are going on automatically by the dictation of the three modes of material nature. BBT purport. Lord Krishna makes a similar statement in Bhagavad Gita 3:28, which reads, Tattvavittu mahabaho guna karma vibhagayo guna guneshu vartanta iti matva na sajate. Translation. One who is in knowledge of the absolute truth, O mighty arm, does not engage himself in the senses and sense gratification, knowing well the difference between work and devotion and work for fruitive results. The material body is always interacts with sense objects. For in order to survive, the body must eat, drink, speak, sleep, and so on. But an enlightened person who knows the science of Krishna consciousness never thinks, I am accepting these sense objects as my property. They are meant for my pleasure, unquote. Similarly, if the body performs a wonderful activity, a Krishna conscious person does not become proud, nor is he depressed by the failure of the body to function in a particular way. In other words, Krishna consciousness means giving up identification with the gross and subtle material bodies. One should see them as the external energy of the Lord, working under the direction of the Lord's empowered representative. Who's that? Maya. One absorbed in fruitive activities works under the jurisdiction of Mahamaya, or the external illusory potency, and experiences the miseries of material existence. On the other hand, a devotee works under the internal potency called Yogamaya and remains satisfied by offering his loving service to the Lord. In either case, the Lord himself, by his multifarious potencies, is the ultimate performer of action. Paragraph. According to Srila Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur, one who claims to be transcendental to the bodily concept of life, but at the same time remains under the influence of material desire and mental transformation, is understood to be a cheater and the lowest type of conditioned soul. Purport, Bhaktisiddhanta. The material body always interacts with the sense objects because in order to survive, the body must eat, drink, speak, sleep, and so on. But an enlightened person who knows the science of Krishna consciousness never thinks, these sense objects are my property. They are meant for my pleasure. Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur's commentary, summarized by Bhaktisiddhanta. One who is liberated from the bodily conception of life knows very well that he is not the doer and that nothing belongs to him. However, there are persons who claim to be transcendently situated and yet are seen to be fully under the influence of material desire. Such persons are nothing more than cheaters, and so must be considered the lowest of mankind. And finally, Vishwanath writes, when the sense objects are received by the senses, the liberated person does not think, I'm experiencing this. Wow. What are they, how do they're experiencing something, so how do they process what they're experiencing? Since it is only material gunas received by the other material gunas. This sign of the person without ahankar is that he is devoid of transformations arising from ahankar. But a person who undergoes transformations and still says, I'm doing nothing at all, is a fraud, deeply bound up in Maya. So the consideration about what they're experiencing and how they're processing what they're experiencing has to do with the application of transcendental knowledge. That is, everything is being carried out by material nature, and it's so they can perceive it, but they don't think of themselves as the doer that's causing this, and so forth and so on. There's certainly, a transcendentalist experiences pain. When they stub their toe, it hurts, or something. But they're not identifying with it. That's the distinction. The consciousness of self-identity protects one from, just like we see here, so that the biology of sense perception is going on, but there's a distinction. All this is being carried out by Prakriti, and I'm not Prakriti. Fixed in transcendental knowledge, not just reading it and then going on, with life as usual. An enlightened person who is free from the contamination of material desire does not consider himself to be the performer of bodily activities. Rather, he knows that in all such activities, it is only the senses, born of the modes of nature, that are contacting sense objects, born of the same modes of nature. That's fixed, to be able to perceive like that. I mean, it's easy to understand it cognitively or notionally or conceptually, and it's another thing to know that's one's experience. Now, it's possible, supposing someone is a Jnani, and they immerse themselves in Gyan, the Upanishads and knowledge, Vidya, Shakti, supposing, and they just devoted to that. They may become liberated in this way. What we were discussing from the previous chapter, maybe it was this previous verses of this chapter, minus bhakti, minus shelter in Krishna and acting for the pleasure of Krishna, it's another temporary situation. And we all have experience of understanding something, pondering on that something, and feeling lift in consciousness, and then time passes, and we go back down again. That knowledge that we had kind of goes somewhere, it slips away, and it's being replaced. That Vidya Shakti is being replaced with a Vidya Shakti, a long-standing tendency. And the medium for that is another Maya Shakti potency that's, according to this chapter, it's pradhan, that provides gross and subtle bodies. So through the medium of gross and subtle bodies, avidya Shakti does its thing. And so all three, the three means Vidya Shakti, Avidya Shakti, and pradhan, producing gross and subtle bodies, that's Maya Shakti. And one who is immersed in Maya Shakti may experience for a short period of time But it certainly requires an enormous amount of investment of energy, but it's temporary. And it cannot, what we heard, it cannot produce love of God. That was also in Harinam Chintamani. It doesn't, knowledge alone does not produce love of God. So love of God is made possible by devotional service. It doesn't toss away Vidya Shakti, but that Vidya Shakti, we also heard yesterday, I think it was, there's the internal potency aspect of knowledge, and there's the external potency feature of knowledge. That was where all this discussion about, science, so forth. Even if all of this, you get confused with all of this analysis, the bottom line is devotional service alone can take us out of the material circumstance. Now, there's all of this so far, 7, 8, 9, 10, and 11. That's 5 chapters worth of knowledge of detachment, which means it's important. Its importance bears its full fruit when the obstacle of avidya is removed, vidya is there in its place, and then there's association with devotees and devotional service. So we're doing already devotional service. It's the beginning practicing stage, but combine that practicing stage with proper knowledge, and the door to bhakti becomes enriched or more easily accessed. It's not a guarantee. It's not a done deal. Now we're pure devotees because we understand these 5 chapters. But the obstacle for pure devotional service is diminished, if not removed. At least diminished. Okay, with that understanding, with that knowledge, then there's an opportunity, or you could say even responsibility, to apply it and conduct our lives accordingly. But it's certainly very helpful to go from the early practicing bhakti stage to a higher bhakti stage. From the prakrita bhakta or kanishta bhakta, or the initial stage, it leads to the madhyama bhakta stage, the middle stage, where there's more of a chance, more of a likelihood that continuous remembrance of Krishna will be there. The continuous remembrance is bhakti. The obstacle is avidya. And, identifying with a dream, for example, and the happiness and distress and all the things that happen in waking or dreaming state, and identifying with it. Obstacle on the bhakti path. Ten after 8. Let's see if there's some discussion.
Hare Krishna Maharaj, I have 4 questions. My first one is about that dream thing.
What?
My first question is about dreams.
Dreams. Okay.
Yeah. So wouldn't Krishna fulfill our dreams? Because it's our desire in our head. It's our desire, but because it's a dream, right? So wouldn't Krishna fulfill those dreams?
What does Krishna think about our dreams? That's your question?
Yeah.
I think she's also equating desires with dreams and asking, in a sense, whether Krishna fulfill those desires. That's why.
That's what you're asking? So let me try to restate it. We have desires. Based upon desires, we have dreams. Of course, we have waking state. We have also sleeping state dreams. Now, since Krishna knows what our desires are, would he not fulfill those desires in dream and waking? That's the question. Well, two things. Krishna is not an order supplier. It's not like a service assignment for Krishna that he's supposed to check out your desires and then here's the supply for your desires. That's not Krishna's function. He may know, and he may or may not reciprocate with fulfilling of desires for various reasons. They may be unwholesome, etc., etc., etc. But the second part is the very fact that we're having the dream, or we're having an experience during our waking state, is, in a sense, a fulfillment of desire. Because the whole show is illusory, and the desires have consequences. Supposing there's a wholesome desire, supposing there's an unwholesome desire, and there's consequences of wholesome and unwholesome desires. And they're experienced in dreaming and waking state. Stepping back from all of that, it's all an illusion, whether it's waking or sleeping. But it's not a fulfillment of desire, it's reciprocation with desire, but it may not be, what, using your phrase, in our head, what in our calculating part of our life, that's what my desire is. Let's say when misfortune comes, it's not a desire. I want some misfortune, please. Okay, here's some misfortune. But it's a consequence in waking and in sleeping states. So fulfilling of desire in the bigger picture is giving us the consequences, good and bad, not only bad, but good, from our desire and the actions we take based upon those desires. So in that deeper sense, or more remote picture of what Krishna is doing, he is reciprocating with our desires. And it may be in the form of, here comes some misery.
Because sometimes we get nightmares, but we don't want nightmares. And
Yeah, they're not just
them.
nightmares. It's, somebody may do something hurtful in a dream, as well as in the awake state. So things we don't want, they come in dreams and in wakefulness.
Okay. My second question. I know I've already asked this before, but I still don't get the answer. So
you're going to ask it again.
Yes. Can God make another person God and
Can God do what?
Can God or Krishna make somebody else Krishna and make himself not Krishna and that person Krishna?
This is word jugglery. Why are you asking that question?
Because if Krishna could do anything.
Because what?
Because if Krishna can do anything.
So if the answer is Krishna can do anything, then are you satisfied?
That means he can do that action, right?
Well, if Krishna can do anything, the answer to your question is Krishna can do anything. Are you satisfied?
Yes.
So Krishna can do anything. Now you're satisfied. No more question. Next.
This is my last one. So this is about last night's class, about that demigods prasadam thing. So can't demigods only eat prasadam because demigods are Krishna's devotees and devotees only eat prasadam?
But sometimes they mess up. Demigods sometimes mess up. They're not perfect. They're devotees. But they sometimes mess up. Okay?
But isn't that an offense?
Well, why are you going down that path? If you mess up, is it an offense, or is it you mess
No,
up?
to offer demigods food without giving it to Vishnu first.
Oh, if you were to decide that you want to offer something to demigods, it's not Vishnu Prasad, is that an offense on your part? That's what
Yes.
you're asking?
Yes.
Well, it's a mistake. It's avidhi purvakam. Avidhi, without knowledge. People do it because they're covered by ignorance. Now you could say it's an offense to be ignorant. We got a lot of offensive people on this planet because people don't know. They're in that state of being covered by Maya. So they do things without proper knowledge. Now, offense, there's degrees and categories. There's categories and there's degrees within those categories. So offense is, and like an attitude towards Krishna. That's offense. Now, there's much milder if one is just ignorant, doesn't know better. Okay?
Yes, thank
All right.
you.
Anyone?
I found the discussion of the difference between the conditioned soul and the liberated soul and how a liberated soul acts very fascinating. But at the same time, it's also contemplating on the practical side of things when we are trying to be liberated, and we also carry certain degree of understanding that we are not supposed to act with a doership spirit. We
With
are
a which?
doership mentality.
Yeah.
We are supposed to see everything in relation to Krishna, and therefore see everything to be gainfully utilized in the service of Krishna.
Yeah.
But then we also get lost in many of the details that we get involved in, like how the emotions get involved, how our mind gets
Yeah.
involved in
Yeah.
the sense objects.
We're in the
So-
liminal space.
I mean, if I have to take a
We're in the transition phase between in one place and another.
right. So I want to take a practical example and try to see how in this particular situation a liberated soul is supposed to act,
Supposed to act.
or at least what we should be striving to act from.
Okay.
So, like, let's say I'm doing a geometry exercise with Radha, and you're staring at a random picture and analyzing whether there are two triangles which can have congruence between them. Now, obviously, like during the time we are looking at the picture, the mind is totally absorbed in that.
Yeah.
And then there is emotional investment. Why is Radha not able to see that? Like, I'm just trying to say that there are a lot of processing which actually sort of takes us away from really maintaining that spirit that, yes, this is Krishna's property. I am acting as a servant. I'm just trying to say, like, we get lost in many of those minutiae. So
yeah.
how do we, I mean, is that the right approach, or we should be always kind of course correcting?
Everything has to do with the heart and the heart's connection with Krishna. And if the heart is profoundly connected with Krishna, as that stage is reached, then when you're dealing with the minutiae, it's not like you have a counter and the counter is ticking, saying, remember Krishna, remember Krishna, remember Krishna. It's just there because the attachment to Krishna. Let's go to, the residents of Vrindavan. Whatever it is that they're dealing with, whether it's the cowherd boys playing, or the gopis this, or the elders that, their affinity for Krishna is so strong, it never leaves them, even they're dealing with minutiae. No, that's a stage that we should, in the bhakti process, aspire for. That's what it looked like, the Vrijbasis. Or the residents of Mathura and the residents of Dwarka in differing degrees of rasa intensity, but they're absorbed in Krishna. So it's not a binary processor matter. It's a heart matter. The mind goes where the heart is. We're not there because what I'm saying here. My thoughts are going to the indifference topic because of our fundamental indifference towards Krishna. When we're dealing with Manusha, our thoughts don't go to Krishna because of indifference toward Krishna. And then we catch ourselves because we're sadhakas. Say, gosh, I just spent all this time fill in the blank, in the workplace or dealing with worldly things, where my attachment to because of indifference to Krishna, my thought wasn't with Krishna, it was with all the temporary. And I have to deal with the temporary. I can't not deal with the temporary. It's not pleasing to Krishna to be negligent in temporary. But I find when I do the temporary, I get caught in the temporary and I forget for the purpose for which I'm doing this, the higher purpose. So that's the immature stage. So we do sadhana to cleanse and to recalibrate our mission in life. That's sadhana bhakti when it's progressive. Online?
There was a question from yesterday from Rupa Vilas Prabhu. So he wants to know that can you please clarify the difference between worshipping Hanuman and worshipping Srila Prabhupada?
Depends on consciousness. Same question. Her question yesterday evening.
It is derived from that question.
Okay, well, I'm responding. It depends on the consciousness behind. Specifically, in our case, in ISKCON, Prabhupada is the founder Acharya, and if we have, by hearing again and again and again and again and again and again, he is the principal Shiksha Guru. And it's true. He's the principal. We read Prabhupada's books. He's the principal Shiksha Guru. So we worship because he's the principal Shiksha Guru. Now, supposing someone is a Ramanadi, and for them, Ram is supreme, and Hanuman is the best spokesman on behalf of Ram. And so they worship Hanuman in that sense. So it depends on the consciousness. And they could just not see that way. They could just see Hanuman. I want strength. I'm going to worship Hanuman. He'll help me get strength. And I'll be victorious in my conquests of life. And so it depends on the consciousness behind.
There is a question half written so far. It's about to come. Any question in the meantime?
Hare Krishna Maharaj, there's a clarifying question to your answer to another question on Monday. So there was a question asked about the motive of Ashwatthama killing the sons and killing the sons of Pandavas, and you mentioned that he killed because he wanted to destroy the dynasty.
Yes.
Of that. So my understanding of that episode was he accidentally killed and not purposefully killed the son.
I that's news to me.
Oh, okay.
And that's why he wanted to kill Parikshit in the womb of Uttara. Same motive. The descendants of the Pandava dynasty would be finished, and there'd be no recourse except the Kuru dynasty would rule, because there's no successor.
Okay.
That was his motive. And he thought that would be pleasing to Duryodhana, because Duryodhana was envious and he was his buddy.
Okay, Maharaj. Yeah, like the story that I heard was like...
Okay, well, I don't want to hear the story you heard.
Okay.
So the question from Sri Devi Mataji. Shriya Mataji. In what stage of bhakti the process of self-realization fits in? As I understand...
Read it again? I was trying to...
In what stage of bhakti...
In what state? Stage of bhakti.
The process of self-realization fits in. As I understand, self-realization and God-realization happens at the same time.
Do you understand the question? I mean, the stage of bhakti that self-realization fits in. They're just ways there are two ways of describing the same thing. Bhakti is the process of self-realization. Self-realization is the process of bhakti. So I'm not sure what the question means. What is she trying to understand?
I think what she's trying to understand is if there is any stage when self-realization happens as a part of the...
It's gradual. It's not an event. It's a gradual evolving. And when can you say, okay, bell rang, I'm self-realized? It's evolving. Ever evolving. Fasten your seatbelt. It's a long ride. Anything else? We have something in the back, if not.
Maharaj, thank you so much for your class. Maharaj, this question has been there. I was has
pondering a question for some time.
For some time, yes, and it just because your previous the answer that you gave kind of is making me ask this. Maharaj, we speak of this process as it's a long run. And at the same time, we also say that we need to get back in this lifetime.
Yes.
And then we read, Harinam Chintamani, we are reading Bhagavatam, and we still are at a very basic sadhaka stage. And I've crossed half of my lifetime, I feel. What's the guarantee?
What's the guarantee? The guarantee is Krishna is kind. And how optimally you receive that kindness, that's up to you. This morning there was lots of fog in the air. And now the fog is practically gone, but it's a cloudy sky. And in both the fog and the clouds in the sky, the sun is blocked. So what are you going to do? You carry on with your life, and knowing that in course of time, the clouds are going to go away, and there'll be sunshine. Probably as soon as I leave. At least that's the weather forecast. There are obstacles for our receipt. I'm using this as a metaphor because it's in Harinam Chintamani. Gradually, the teaching, we have faith, you and I have faith in the scriptures, and the scriptures teach us in due course of time, by the process of chanting and awakening a life of devotion, the clouds of anarthas and the fog or mist of ignorance will be dissipated. How long? It's meant, the potential, the potency is there in this lifetime. Now, supposing somebody is like really, 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 really covered. One lifetime? Well, it's certainly possible. Look at Jagai Madhai, one lifetime, when, in a moment, etc. But however long, let's go to another nice example. Sabari, she just spent her life just with faith in Sage Matanga. And he said, no, you can't come with me. You wait, Ram will come. And she waited and Ram came. So we hear things like this, and it depends on our faith. And then that means also how we apply ourselves to the bhakti process. It's up to us. How long? How many lifetimes? But we're not, it's not nice that we stomp our little foot and say, Krishna, hurry up. That's not the proper approach. We can be as enthusiastic as possible, or take it even stronger than enthusiasm, and greedy. In a good sense. So the intensity of our application to the bhakti process, and even more, the fruit of the bhakti process is our relationship with Krishna. That's the determining factor. How long it's going to take for the clouds and mist to go away, and then stay away once it's away. Is it possible? Yes. In this lifetime? Yes. What's the guarantee? That was your question. It's Krishna's kind. And in the scriptures, we invest our faith in the scriptures that tells us how to access Krishna's kindness. We're his servant, and he can do as he likes. And he will.
Thank you, Maharaj. Maharaj, one more question. This is the last part of Bhaktisiddhanta's purport that you read for today's verse. You kind of concluded the sentence by, you were reading it and you said that there has been a transformation, but then somebody doesn't really show it. And that's kind of like a fraud mentality, or like a cheating mentality. I was like, sometimes we've seen like devotees, like really elevated souls who, and they are being modest and about anything that transformational happening to them.
Yeah.
And that wouldn't be like cheating, right?
No. It's their humility. They're expressing their feeling. And their feeling is a feeling of humility.
So did I get that context wrong, or like I'm
No,
not sure?
it's humility. That's not wrong.
Okay. No, the last part that you read. Was it like only referring to the not liberated souls, like avidya?
It's persons who are explicitly and deliberately pretentious.
Okay.
Are the cheaters. They're deluding themselves and deluding others. No, it's Bhaktisiddhanta's style. He's like, cutting. And no nonsense around me. I've got a sword. The sword of knowledge, and that's his style. And there's others that are softer and other styles. But that's his style. Strong. This is this and that's that. Now, it doesn't discount somebody who's humble and says, I'm not there yet, etc., etc., etc. He was dealing, besides his own nature, during his father's life, Bhaktivinoda Thakur's life, the reputation of Lord Chaitanya and Lord Chaitanya's teachings had been sullied significantly because there were deviations in the name of Lord Chaitanya that were very embarrassing. Bhaktivinoda Thakur's process was humble persuasion. Following him, Bhaktisiddhanta's was chopping. He was sometimes called the Shringa Guru. They would see him coming and they'd run. Because he was, he was very intense. And if people challenged him back, he'd stand his ground and, be very strong. That was just, so he wanted, as Bhaktivinoda Thakur wanted, Shuddha Bhakti to prevail. And they had different approaches, different times, different circumstances, different personalities. So it's just his, that language like that is not Bhaktivinoda Thakur's language. Although, we read a little bit, they go to hell. No, so he had the capacity to be strong, but largely it was humble persuasion. And it was just the mode in very powerfully presented humble persuasion to bring Shuddha Bhakti back into the foreground. Living it himself, writing about it, setting the example, humble persuasion to others to come to that position. That's my picture of Bhaktivinoda Thakur, prolific and powerful. Bhaktisiddhanta wrote fewer books, but very powerful. And the approach was different.
Maharaj, I just have one last question.
Okay, and I'm going to end after this question.
Maharaj, this is in connection to your yesterday's class and some questions that were asked following that. So you said in one of the answers yesterday.
We don't do what?
You said in one of the responses to a question yesterday that I think it was Radha's question, and you said, when there are people following other faith, and if they are doing it in the order of that particular faith, they do not go to hell, or it's not an offense. It's not offense.
Correct.
On the other side, we are talking about. On the other hand, we have our Vedas, and say somebody who is not knowledgeable about or hasn't had the opportunity to meet devotees and is following the Vedic way of life, or Vedas, or worshipping demigods,
yes,
say, and but then you also mentioned that, any sort of worship without the worship of Vishnu, the basis of varnashram worship is actually the worship of Vishnu.
yes.
I'm not able to kind of reconcile. One hand, we are talking about another faith and then following that in order. And on this side, we have demigod worship, which also comes from our Vedas.
Yes, it does. It comes from the Vedas.
Yeah. So would this be offensive?
No.
Versus the other one being not offensive, or not going to hell?
The answer to that question has to do with how they regard Vishnu.
With absence of knowledge.
Yes. Supposing someone doesn't have full knowledge. They don't have full knowledge, and the knowledge that they have, however they got it, their grandmother or something, and they just know this and that, and they do this and that faithfully. Now, supposing what their grandmother gave them is misguided.
Mm.
But they're faithfully following what their grandmother gave them. So there's something virtuous in what they're doing, and there's something misguided in what they're doing. So the distinct, there's also people of other persuasions. They also don't have proper knowledge even of their own faith, and nor do they apply the teaching of their own faith. And that was Prabhupada's challenge. Are you Christian? Yes. Do you eat meat? Yes. You're not Christian. Now, wait a minute. Or even without asking the first question. Do you eat meat? Yes. You're not Christian. Huh? Or just, right, you're not Christian. Sometimes there are discussions like that. Prabhupada told the story. After a program in Stockholm, a young man came up and said, I really like what you said. I'm a Christian. Prabhupada said, no, you're not a Christian. And he said, you never met me before. How can you say I'm not a Christian? He said, I'll ask you one question. Do you eat meat? Yes. You're not Christian. So he wasn't trying to persuade them to become this ism instead of that ism. You have a teaching, follow it. God has given teachings, or God, from the Old Testament and the New Testament, God gave teachings directly to Moses and gave teachings directly to Christ, and who gave those teachings, then follow it. He didn't encourage them to abandon because you're going to go to hell if you follow your teachings. Follow your teachings. Dharma means following the codes given by God. So that's on that side. And then those who are followers of the Vedas, don't follow a misguided version of the Vedas, follow the Vedas. And Varnashram is Varnashram. And this Daivi Varnashram means for the satisfaction of Vishnu. Supposing over here people that follow Varnashram duties, it's right in the Bhagavatam, and they don't acknowledge the purpose of this is satisfying Vishnu, but they follow Varnashram. Supposing there's a Brahmin, it's verses in the Bhagavatam. They knew all the procedures, but it's not for the pleasure of Vishnu. They're mistaken. They're not followers of the Vedas. Even they're following Varnashram, because Varnashram means satisfy Vishnu. So everything rests upon what their regard for Vishnu is, because that's Vedic. Supposing I don't know that, because I only heard from my grandmother, or I heard from a teacher that doesn't know it because he doesn't have the full understanding of the Vedas. So it's misguided. Avidhi purvakam, right in Bhagavad Gita. Now, what does Krishna say about such people? He doesn't say they go to hell, but they need proper knowledge. That's what Krishna says. So what should we do? We try to assist Krishna and give proper knowledge, not by shaking our finger at and saying you're going to hell if you don't worship Vishnu. The purpose of this is to satisfy Vishnu. A real Christian will not kill. Thou shalt not kill. It's a commandment. So why are you doing it? It's a commandment. So please do it. Not to take this ism. Follow your teachings. And then there's elevation. You become a demigod worshiper according to the codes of the Vedas. You follow Varnashram and you become elevated. It may be a slow journey, but you become elevated. So follow. Not take this ism instead of that ism, but follow. Now here's the elevator instead of the stairway. This is an option for you. But that the essence is worship of Vishnu or Krishna, and that's where it will take you. It's the swift deliverer, and for this age of Kali, they circle around and say that in this age of Kali, the recommended method is the chanting of the Lord's name. There's a really celebrated discussion. Prabhupada was in Australia, I forget where, Melbourne or somewhere outside Melbourne or something like that. He was invited to a monastery, and he sat for 2 hours. And he said at the end they gave him applause for 10 minutes, and he wasn't persuading them give up that ism, take this ism. Do you see Christ as guru? He's our guru. He's representative of God, and one should follow. You're followers of Christ. Follow his teachings. And these are his teachings. I don't know if they were vegetarian or not. I don't know the details of the conversation, the dialogue, and the questions, answers afterwards. But they really appreciate it. His goal wasn't give up that ism and take this ism. It was be a follower. You're wonderful followers of your teachings. Fantastic. You'll achieve perfection. Okay? That address? Okay, to take the online and we'll end. It's late.
Question from Giridhar Prabhu. Hare Krishna. If there is unwholesome dream which shows there is unwanted attachment, should we purify knowing these attachments? How do we purify?
The bad dreams have to do with bad impressions, and there's not much you can do about bad impressions except endure them. You tolerate and make the mind cleansed by the cleansing process, starting with, and most important of all, is proper chanting. And that bad dream thing will like, the clouds in the sky, will be dissipated by the light of the holy name and the other bhakti processes that cleanse the heart and to cleanse the mind. That's it?
No, there is one more from Snehavalli Mataji. We discussed earlier that striving for bhakti is also bhakti.
Striving for bhakti is also bhakti. Yes.
Now, according to Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur's commentary, which is mentioned in the BBT purport, is that one who claims to be transcendental to the bodily concept of life, by the same time remains under the influence of material desires and mental transformation, is understood to be a cheater.
Material desires and
mental transformations.
Mental transformation
is understood to be a cheater and the lowest type of conditioned soul. So actually that quote is from Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur, not Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur, what she was referring to.
All right.
So the point that she is making is that the striving for bhakti is also bhakti. Then why one?
Well, it has to do with whether you're striving for or not. In other words, and there's gradations between these three: the offensive, the clearing, and the pure. Kanishta, Madhyama, Uttama. Nam, Aparad, Namabhas, Shuddha Nam. And there's gradations of Namabhas. And there's gradations of Aparad. So it's not just three buckets and there's gradations. So everything has to do with striving. And if one is not striving but is pretentious, that's offense. That's going to, there's a consequence for pretending and not striving to overcome it, overcome the, the covering or the weakness tendencies. When you enter into the bhakti process, it's not just, okay, I'm now, chanting, or I'm now initiated, or I'm now, there's a continual striving process. Supposing that striving slackens. Now, it's not that you go to hell if striving slackens. There's consequences for slackening. One gets, again, covered. But that bhakti that one has done gets covered. But supposing one is just pretending. I know some people. I'm thinking of one person in particular. He is a big pretender. Big pretender. Big pretender. And he has some charisma. A big pretender. And, he's dragging people to hell. Without, elaborating about that person. So it's that kind of person. And he does some stuff that looks like bhakti. But his heart is very dark. So that, everything has to do with one's submission and striving for Shuddha Bhakti, or striving for the uncontaminated stage.